Beyond the thin stretch of Earth's atmosphere lies a graveyard of dead worlds, barren, silent, unforgiving, worlds that once held promise, worlds that never woke, worlds that drift through the blackness, unchanged for billions of years, waiting for something that never came. But among all those lifeless spheres, there are two that refuse to leave our imagination. Two worlds that call to us. Two worlds that seem to pull at something deep within us, something ancient and restless, something that looks up at the night sky and wonders, what is out there? Could we live there? Should we try? The Moon and Mars. One is our nearest neighbor, a silent companion that has circled Earth since before life began. Its surface is scarred with impact craters, frozen in time, a perfect archive of the early solar system. The other is a distant cousin, a world that once had rivers and lakes, a thicker atmosphere, perhaps even the conditions for life. Now it is a cold desert, a rust-colored wasteland, a ghost of what it might have been. Together, they haunt us, and together, they are pulling us back. For decades, we left them alone. The Moon, once visited, was abandoned. Mars, once imagined, remained a dream. We turned our attention inward. We built space stations. We studied Earth. We learned to live in low orbit. But something has changed. A new generation of explorers has emerged. Not just from one nation, but from many. And two countries in particular are driving this resurgence: the United States and China. They are racing toward the Moon, not for a fleeting visit this time, for something more permanent, more ambitious. They are racing to build bases, to extract resources, to establish a presence that will last for decades. They are racing to answer a question that has haunted humanity since we first looked up at the stars. Are we meant to stay here, or are we meant to go? This is the story of that race. A quiet competition. A slow unfolding drama. A journey back to worlds we thought we had conquered, only to realize we had barely touched them. This is the story of the new moon race. And it begins where all journeys begin, with a question. It is a question worth sitting with for a moment. Why return to a place we have already been? After all, we have been to the Moon. We have walked on its surface. We have driven across its dusty plains. We have brought back hundreds of kilograms of rock and soil. We have studied those samples for decades. We know its composition. We know its history. We know it is barren. We know it is silent. And yet, here we are, planning to go back, not just to visit, to stay. So what changed? What makes the Moon worth returning to after more than half a century of neglect? The answer, as it so often does, begins with something small, something almost invisible: water. For decades, scientists believed the Moon was completely dry, a desiccated world, a place where not a single drop of water had ever existed. The Apollo samples confirmed this. They found no water. They found no ice. The Moon was a bone-dry world, as lifeless as a stone in the desert. But that was based on the samples we brought back. Samples from the equatorial regions, the places where the sun beats down relentlessly, where temperatures soar to over 100 degrees Celsius during the lunar day, and plunge to nearly -200 degrees at night. The equatorial regions, the places Apollo could reach. But the poles? We never went there. We never even looked. And when we finally did, everything changed. In 2009, NASA's L-Cross mission deliberately crashed a spent rocket stage into a permanently shadowed crater near the lunar South Pole. The impact kicked up a plume of debris, and hidden within that plume, instruments detected something astonishing. Water. Not just a trace. A significant amount. Ice mixed with the lunar soil, locked in the cold, dark depths of craters that have not seen sunlight for billions of years. That discovery changed everything. Suddenly, the moon was no longer just a destination. It was a resource, because water on the moon is not just for drinking. It is for breathing. It is for growing food. And most importantly, it is for fuel. Split water into its component parts, hydrogen and oxygen, and you have rocket propellant, the most valuable commodity in space, the one thing that makes every mission possible, and the one thing that is incredibly expensive to launch from Earth. Imagine this. Every kilogram of material launched from Earth costs thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, sometimes more. To send a single kilogram to the moon requires a rocket the size of a skyscraper, millions of liters of fuel, and an engineering feat that pushes the limits of human capability. But if that same kilogram of water is already on the moon, if we can extract it, refine it, and turn it into fuel, then the moon becomes a gas station, a depot, a launching point for missions to Mars and beyond. This is not science fiction. This is the near future. And it is the reason the moon has suddenly become the most valuable piece of real estate in the solar system. But water is not the only reason. The moon also holds something else, something even more precious, something we have only begun to understand. Time. The moon has no atmosphere, no wind, no rain, no tectonic activity. It is a world frozen in place, preserved exactly as it was billions of years ago. Its surface is an archive, a library of the early solar system, a record of everything that has happened in our cosmic neighborhood since the planets first formed. The craters on the lunar surface tell the story of a violent past, a time when the solar system was a chaotic place, filled with debris and collisions, a time when Earth itself was battered by impacts so massive they would have vaporized the oceans and melted the surface. We cannot find that record on Earth. Plate tectonics have recycled our surface. Weather and erosion have worn away the evidence. The oldest rocks on Earth are barely 4 billion years old. But the moon? Its surface is much older. Some parts have remained unchanged for more than 4.5 billion years. By studying the moon, we are studying the history of our own planet, the history of the solar system, the history of everything, and we have barely scratched the surface. Apollo brought back samples from 6 landing sites, all of them near the equator, all of them from a narrow band of the lunar surface. It is as if we had explored Earth by visiting 6 beaches and decided we understood the entire planet. There is so much we do not know, so much waiting to be discovered. The lunar poles, for example, are a mystery. They exist in a state of permanent twilight. The sun never rises fully, never sets fully. It skims the horizon, casting long shadows, creating a landscape of eternal half-light. In the deepest craters, the sun never reaches at all. These are the permanently shadowed regions, the coldest places in the solar system, colder than the surface of Pluto, cold enough to trap volatiles, water ice, carbon dioxide, methane, for billions of years. Those volatiles are a time capsule. They contain the history of the solar system, comet impacts, solar wind, the organic compounds that may have seeded life on Earth. They are also a resource, a treasure chest, waiting to be opened. And this brings us to another reason we are returning, a reason that has nothing to do with science or resources, A reason that is more difficult to quantify, but no less important. Competition. The original space race was driven by Cold War rivalry. The United States and the Soviet Union, locked in a struggle for global dominance, used space as a proxy for their conflict. Apollo was not just about science. It was about proving which system was superior. Capitalism or communism, democracy or authoritarianism. The moon was a stage, and the world was watching. That race ended when Apollo succeeded. The United States won. The Soviets gave up, and the moon faded from public consciousness. But now, a new competitor has emerged: China. And unlike the Soviet Union, China is not content to be second. To understand how serious this competition has become, consider the timeline. In April of this year, NASA launched Artemis II, carrying 4 astronauts on the first crewed flight around the moon in more than 50 years. It was a historic moment. The crew became the first humans to travel beyond low Earth orbit since Apollo 17. They flew farther than any human being in history, venturing some 7,000 kilometers beyond the far side of the moon. For 10 days, they tested Orion's life support systems, practiced manual piloting, and proved that America still had the capability to send humans deep into space. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman called it the beginning of something larger. Not just a visit, a return to stay. But even as the Artemis II capsule splashed down in the Pacific, China was preparing its own statement. Just days before the American launch, China's Chang'e 7 lunar probe had already arrived at the Wenchang Space Launch Site in Hainan Province. The spacecraft was in position. The Long March Chatter 5 rocket was being assembled. The mission was set for the second half of this year. The contrast is impossible to ignore. America completed its crewed lunar flyby in April. China's uncrewed mission to the lunar South Pole is scheduled for late this year. 2 nations, 2 timelines, 1 destination. China's space program is methodical, patient, strategic. They have built a space station. They have landed rovers on the moon. They have returned lunar samples. They have landed a rover on Mars. They have done all of this with precision and efficiency, without the dramatic failures that marked the early American and Soviet programs. And they have stated their goal clearly: a Chinese crew on the moon before 2030. This is not a distant ambition. This is a near-term objective. And they are moving toward it with the same determination that drove America to Apollo. Chang'e 7 is a critical step in that journey. It is designed to achieve breakthroughs in multiple key technologies: high-precision soft landing on the lunar surface, legged movements, hopping, and exploration of permanently shadowed craters. It will conduct environmental and resource surveys of the lunar South Pole, using a comprehensive approach that involves orbiting, landing, roving, and hopping. And it will carry international cooperation, scientific payloads from Egypt, Bahrain, Italy, Russia, Switzerland, Thailand, and the International Lunar Observatory Association. China is not just building a lunar program, it is building alliances. The United States, meanwhile, is moving forward with Artemis, a program designed to return astronauts to the moon, establish a permanent presence, and build the infrastructure for deeper space exploration. But Artemis has been plagued by delays, cost overruns, technical challenges, the kind of challenges that come with ambitious programs and limited budgets. The gap is narrowing. This is not a race in the traditional sense. There is no finish line, no single moment when the winner is declared. But the competition is real. It is palpable. It drives decisions. It shapes priorities. It inspires nations. Because whoever establishes a permanent presence on the moon first will have a tremendous advantage. They will control access to the most valuable resources. They will set the standards for lunar governance. They will shape the future of space exploration for generations. And there is another dimension to this competition, one that is often overlooked. The moon is not just a destination, it is a proving ground. If we can learn to live on the moon, to build habitats, extract resources, generate power, maintain life support systems, we can learn to live anywhere. The moon is a test bed, a laboratory, a stepping stone. Mars is the ultimate prize. The red world, the distant cousin, the world that may have once harbored life, the world that may harbor it still. But Mars is far, incredibly far. Months of travel, months of isolation. A journey that pushes the limits of human endurance. The moon is close. 3 days, a short hop compared to the voyage to Mars. It is the perfect place to test the technologies we will need for deep space exploration, to make mistakes, to learn, to fail safely, and then, when we are ready, to push further. There is a saying among space enthusiasts: the moon is not the destination, it is the stepping stone. And that is perhaps the most important reason we are returning. Because the moon is not an end. It is a beginning of something larger, something more profound, something that will define our species for centuries to come. We are not going back to the moon to plant flags and take photographs. We are going back to learn how to live off Earth, to become a multi-world species, to ensure that humanity does not have all its eggs in one basket. It is an ambitious vision. Some would say unrealistic. Others would say essential. But whatever your perspective, one thing is clear. The moon is calling us back. And this time, we are not just visiting. This time, we are staying. There is something about the moon that has always captivated us. Long before we understood what it was, a sphere of rock and dust, a companion world bound to us by gravity. We told stories about it. We wove myths around its phases. We worshipped it. We feared it. We used it to mark time, to navigate oceans, to explain the inexplicable. The moon has been with us since the beginning. It has watched us evolve. It has witnessed every triumph and every tragedy. It is the one constant in a sky that is always changing. And yet, for all its familiarity, it has always felt just out of reach. That is, until we reached it. Apollo 11 changed everything. On July 20th, 1969, human beings stood on another world for the first time. It was not just a scientific achievement. It was a cultural one, a philosophical one, a moment that redefined what it meant to be human. For a brief moment, we were no longer earthbound creatures. We were explorers, pioneers, travelers of the cosmos. And then, we stopped. The last human left the moon in December 1972. Apollo 17, Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt. They drove their rover across the lunar surface, collected samples, took photographs, and then climbed back into their capsule and returned home. No one has been back since. 54 years. More than half a century. Think about that. The generation that watched the moon landing is aging. Many of them are gone. The children who dreamed of becoming astronauts are now grandparents. The grandchildren of those children are now adults. And not a single one of them has ever seen a human being walk on another world. That is a long time, long enough for the memory to fade, long enough for the wonder to become history, long enough for the moon to become, once again, a distant object in the sky rather than a place we have visited. But something is shifting. There is a restlessness in the air, a quiet, growing awareness that we have been standing still for too long, that the moon is still there, that it is waiting, that we left it unfinished. And this restlessness is not just about science or resources or competition. It is about something older, something deeper. It is about the human need to explore. This is not a rational impulse. It does not make economic sense. It does not always have a practical purpose. It is something that lives in us, passed down through countless generations, written into our DNA. Our ancestors were explorers. They left Africa. They crossed oceans. They climbed mountains. They ventured into the unknown, not because they had to, but because they could. Because something in them demanded it. That impulse has never left us. It has simply been dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And now, it is awakening. There is a generation of young people today who have never known a world without the International Space Station. They have grown up with satellites and rovers and space telescopes. They have watched astronauts live and work in orbit. They have seen images from Mars, from Pluto, from the edge of the solar system. But they have never seen a human being on the moon. For them, Apollo is history, black and white footage, a museum exhibit, something that happened to their grandparents. They want their own moment, their own giant leap, their own chance to look up at the moon and know that someone is there. This is not a trivial desire. It is a fundamental human need, the need to push boundaries, to test limits, to prove that we are capable of more than we have done. And this is precisely what the new moon race taps into. Because competition, for all its flaws, is one of the most powerful motivators in human history. It has driven us to explore, to discover, to achieve. The original space race was not just about science. It was about pride, about proving superiority, about showing the world what a nation was capable of. And it worked. Apollo succeeded because the United States was determined to win. The goal was clear. The timeline was tight. The resources were unlimited. And the world was watching. That same determination is now driving China. China's space program is not just about technology. It is about national pride. It is about demonstrating that China is a great power, capable of achieving what only the United States has achieved. It is about inspiring a new generation of Chinese scientists and engineers. It is about showing the world that the future belongs to China. This is not a criticism. It is an observation. Every nation that has ever achieved greatness has done so through ambition and determination. The United States did it. The Soviet Union tried. Now China is doing it. And the effect is profound. Because when one nation pushes forward, others must follow. No country wants to be left behind. No country wants to watch its rival claim the high ground. The moon is not just a destination. It is a symbol, a statement, a declaration of intent. This is why the timeline matters. Artemis II flew in April. 4 astronauts circled the moon and returned safely. It was a historic mission, a proof of concept, a signal that America is still in the game. But even as the capsule splashed down, China was preparing its own move. Chang'e 7, scheduled for late this year, will explore the lunar South Pole. It will search for water ice. It will test technologies. It will lay the groundwork for a permanent presence. And after that, Chang'e 8, a mission designed to test technologies for a lunar base. Construction of the International Lunar Research Station, a collaborative project with Russia and other partners. A Chinese crew on the moon before the decade is out. The timeline is aggressive, but so was Apollo. And the Chinese are not alone. They are building alliances. They are bringing other nations into their orbit. They are creating a parallel system to the American-led Artemis Accords. This is not just a race to the moon. It is a race to define the rules of lunar exploration, to determine who gets access to resources, to establish who has the right to build bases, claim territory, shape the future. And that brings us to an uncomfortable truth. The moon is not neutral ground. It is a frontier. And frontiers, throughout human history, have always been contested. There is a word for this: geopolitics, the study of how power is distributed across the world, and now across the solar system. The United States sees the moon as a place for international cooperation. The Artemis Accords, signed by more than 40 nations, lay out principles for peaceful exploration. Transparency, interoperability, the sharing of scientific data, the protection of historic sites. China sees it differently. It has not signed the Artemis Accords. It has its own vision, its own partnerships, its own rules. And so we have two competing visions for the future of lunar exploration. One American-led, one Chinese-led, both determined to succeed. This is not necessarily a bad thing. Competition can spur innovation. It can accelerate progress. It can inspire nations to achieve more than they would have achieved alone. But it can also lead to conflict, to misunderstandings, to a race that becomes more about winning than about exploring. The stakes are high, and the world is watching. There is another dimension to this, one that is often overlooked in the discussions of politics and resources and timelines. It is the question of legacy. What kind of civilization are we building? What do we want to be remembered for? For the wars we fought? The divisions we created? The damage we did to our own planet? Or for the worlds we explored? The boundaries we pushed? The future we built? This is what the new moon race is really about. Not flags and footprints, not resources and alliances, but the story we are telling ourselves about who we are. We are a species that looks up. We have always looked up. We have always wondered. We have always asked the big questions. Where did we come from? Are we alone? What is our place in the cosmos? These questions do not have easy answers, but they are the questions that define us. They are the questions that drive us to explore, to discover, to reach for something beyond ourselves. And the moon is the first step, not the final destination, not the ultimate prize, just the beginning of something larger, something that will take us to Mars, to the asteroid belt, to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, to the edge of the solar system and beyond. But it starts with the moon. It starts with a small step, a footprint in the dust, a flag planted in the silence, and a question that has haunted us since the first humans looked up at the night sky. What is out there? We are finally ready to answer it. To understand where we are going, we first need to understand where we have been. The original space race was not really about space. It was about power. It was about ideology. It was about two superpowers locked in a struggle for global dominance, using the heavens as a stage for their earthly ambitions. The United States and the Soviet Union, capitalism and communism, democracy and authoritarianism. The moon was a proxy, a symbol, a way of proving which system was superior. And when Apollo succeeded, when Neil Armstrong took that small step and delivered that giant leap, the message was clear. The United States had won. The Soviet Union had been defeated. The race was over. But the competition never truly ended. It simply went underground. It shifted from the moon to other arenas: low Earth orbit, space stations, robotic exploration. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. And for a time, it seemed as though space exploration had become a cooperative endeavor, a shared human endeavor. That era is over. A new competitor has emerged. And this time, the stakes are even higher. China has arrived, not as a follower, not as a junior partner, but as a peer, a rival, a nation determined to claim its place among the great spacefaring powers. And unlike the Soviet Union, China is not content to be second. To understand how serious this competition has become, we need to look at the timelines, the milestones, the quiet, methodical progress that China has made over the past 2 decades. In April of this year, NASA launched Artemis II. 4 astronauts, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen, lifted off from Kennedy Space Center aboard the Space Launch System rocket. They traveled farther from Earth than any human being in history, venturing nearly 406,000 kilometers into space, surpassing even the record set by Apollo 13. For 10 days, they orbited the moon, tested Orion's systems, and proved that America still had the capability to send humans deep into space. It was a triumphant moment, a homecoming, a declaration. But even as the Artemis II capsule splashed down in the Pacific, China was preparing its own statement. Just days before the American launch, China's Chang'e 7 lunar probe had already arrived at the Wenchang Space Launch Site in Hainan Province. The spacecraft was in position. The Long March 5 rocket was being assembled. The mission was set for the second half of this year. The contrast is impossible to ignore. America completed its crewed lunar flyby in April. China's uncrewed mission to the lunar South Pole is scheduled for late this year. 2 nations, 2 timelines, 1 destination. But this is only part of the story. The real competition is not about who gets there first. It is about who stays, who builds, who controls. And that brings us to the most important development in lunar exploration since Apollo: the Artemis Accords. In less than 6 years, this American-led framework has grown from 8 founding nations to nearly 70 signatories. Just this year alone, Botswana, Latvia, Jordan, Morocco, Malta, Paraguay, and Ireland have joined. The list includes the United States, Japan, Italy, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, India, Portugal, and Oman, a coalition of nations representing every continent and every major spacefaring power. The Accords lay out principles for peaceful lunar exploration: transparency, interoperability, the sharing of scientific data, the protection of historic sites. They are designed to create a framework for cooperation, to ensure that the moon is not simply claimed by whoever gets there first. But there is a problem. China has not signed the Artemis Accords. Instead, China has built its own framework, its own alliances, its own vision for the future of lunar exploration. The International Lunar Research Station, the ILRS. This is China's answer to the Artemis Accords, a collaborative project with Russia and 13 other countries designed to build a permanent research station on the lunar surface. It is not just a base. It is a statement, a declaration that China intends to be a leader in lunar exploration, not a follower. and it is moving forward rapidly. In May of last year, Roscosmos and the China National Space Administration signed a memorandum on the construction of a power plant for the ILRS. The station will conduct fundamental space research and test technologies for long-term unmanned operation, with the prospect of human presence on the Moon. The Russian Academy of Sciences has approved the concept for the creation of the Russian segment of the station. Roscosmos and Rosatom are working together on a small nuclear reactor to power the base, drawing on Russia's extensive experience with space-based nuclear technology. The ILRS is scheduled for completion in 2036. It will be a sprawling, science-focused facility on the lunar surface, operated robotically at first, with human presence to follow. And it will be built with international cooperation. Scientific payloads from Egypt, Bahrain, Italy, Russia, Switzerland, Thailand, and the International Lunar Observatory Association are already planned for Chang'e 7. Chang'e 8, expected to launch around 2029, will carry Russia's lunar plasma dust environment sensor and a lunar ion and high-energy neutral particle analyzer. China is not just building a lunar program. It is building a coalition. And the difference between the two approaches is stark. The Artemis Accords are inclusive. They welcome any nation willing to sign. They emphasize transparency and cooperation. They are designed to create a shared framework for lunar exploration. The ILRS is more exclusive. It is a partnership between China and Russia, with other nations invited to participate, but not to lead. It is a reflection of China's top-down, centralized approach to space exploration, efficient, focused, and driven by national ambition. This is not a criticism. It is an observation. Two different systems, two different visions, two different ways of organizing human activity on the Moon, and they are on a collision course, because the Moon's south pole is the prize, the most valuable real estate in the solar system. Water ice in permanently shadowed craters, continuous sunlight for solar power, the perfect location for a permanent base. Both the United States and China are targeting the same region, the same craters, the same resources, and neither is willing to cede control. NASA has set its sights on a lunar landing by 2028, with annual crewed landings to follow and a permanent base to be constructed over the next decade. The target date corresponds with President Trump's national space policy, a directive designed to return Americans to the Moon by 2028 through the Artemis program, to assert American leadership in space, lay the foundations for lunar economic development, prepare for the journey to Mars, and inspire the next generation of American explorers. China is targeting 2030 for its own crewed landing. Its approach is more streamlined: 2 rockets, 1 for the crew and 1 for the lander, docking in lunar orbit without the need for complex in-space refueling. The Long March 10 rocket and Mengzhou crew spacecraft have already undergone testing. The Lanyue lunar lander has demonstrated its ascent and descent capabilities. 2 timelines, 2 approaches, 1 destination, and the gap is narrowing. We are back in the business of sending astronauts to the Moon, bringing them back safely, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman said following the Artemis II splashdown. But even he acknowledged the uncertainty. They may be early, he said of China, and recent history suggests we might be late. This is not an idle concern. SpaceX's Starship, the vehicle chosen to land astronauts on the lunar surface for Artemis III, is at least 2 years behind its original delivery date. Blue Origin's Mark II lander is at least 8 months overdue, with nearly half the concerns identified at a 2024 design review still outstanding over a year later. China faces its own challenges. It has never landed humans on the Moon. It must prove an entirely new mission architecture within the next 4 years. but it has a history of meeting its space deadlines, and there are no public signs of major setbacks. An important question for the ILRS is power supply, and in this Russia has a natural advantage, said Wu Weiren, chief designer of China's lunar exploration program. When it comes to nuclear power plants, especially sending them into space, it leads the world. It is ahead of the United States. Russia inherited nuclear know-how from the Soviet Union, which launched more than 30 satellites equipped with fission reactors during the Cold War. The United States, by comparison, has launched only one such satellite. The competition is not just about landers and rockets. It is about energy, resources, infrastructure, the ability to sustain a permanent presence on the moon. And that brings us to the most important question of all. What happens when we arrive? There are no laws on the moon, no police, no courts, no established framework for resolving disputes. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 provides some guidance. It states that the moon is the province of all humankind, that no nation can claim sovereignty over lunar territory. That space exploration should be conducted for the benefit of all countries. But the treaty is vague. It was written in a different era, before the prospect of lunar resource extraction became a reality. It does not address the questions that are now urgent. Who owns the water ice in the shadowed craters? Who has the right to mine it? Who gets to build the first base? Who decides where the boundaries are? These are not abstract questions. They are practical ones. And they will be answered in the coming years by the nations that get there first. The Artemis Accords attempt to provide a framework. They emphasize transparency and cooperation. They require signatories to share scientific data. They protect historic sites, but China has not signed them. And without China's participation, any framework for lunar governance is incomplete. This is the geopolitical reality of the new moon race. Two superpowers, two competing visions, two sets of alliances, and the stakes could not be higher. Because the moon is not the final destination. It is a stepping stone, a proving ground, a place to learn how to live off Earth. If we can build a base on the moon, we can build a base on Mars. If we can extract resources from the lunar surface, we can extract resources from asteroids. If we can establish a permanent presence on the moon, we can establish a permanent presence throughout the solar system. The nation that masters the moon will master the future of space exploration. And that is why the competition is so intense. That is why the timelines are so tight. That is why every launch, every test, every milestone is so closely watched. There is an old saying, the moon is the 8th continent. It is not a destination. It is a world waiting to be explored, a world waiting to be claimed. And right now, 2 nations are racing to claim it. But there is another dimension to this competition, one that is often overlooked. It is about legitimacy, about credibility, about the right to lead. The United States has been the dominant space power for decades. It has the most experience, the most advanced technology, the most established institutions. But it has also been plagued by delays, cost overruns, and political uncertainty. China has been methodical, patient, and efficient. It has achieved more in the past decade than any other nation besides the United States, and it is closing the gap rapidly. The question is not whether China will land on the moon. It is whether the United States can do it first, whether it can maintain its leadership, whether it can inspire a new generation of explorers. There is no bigger prize for China on the table today than landing people on the moon, said Clayton Swope, Deputy Director of the Aerospace Security Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. This is the essential next step for China on the road to preeminence in space. That is a sobering assessment, and it reflects the reality of the new moon race. This is not a competition for national pride alone. It is a competition for the future. A competition that will shape the course of human history for generations to come. The moon is not just a destination, it is a symbol, a statement, a declaration of intent. And whoever arrives first will define what comes next. So here we are, two superpowers, two timelines, two visions for the future of lunar exploration, both racing toward the same destination, both determined to succeed. But the real question is not who gets there first. It is what happens when we arrive. Because this time, we are not just visiting. We are staying. We are building. We are establishing a permanent presence on a world that has remained untouched for billions of years. And that changes everything. Apollo was a visit, a brief encounter, a few days on the surface, a few footprints in the dust, and then home. The astronauts left behind flags, equipment, and a plaque that read, "We came in peace for all mankind." But they also left behind something else, a legacy, a proof of concept, a demonstration that human beings could travel to another world and return safely. That was the beginning. This is the next chapter. Artemis is not about flags and footprints. It is about infrastructure. It is about sustainability. It is about building a presence that will last for decades, not days. The vision is ambitious. A lunar base at the South Pole, a permanent habitat for astronauts, rovers for exploration, equipment for mining water ice, solar panels for power, a communications network for data transmission, a landing pad for future missions. All of this is being planned. All of this is being designed. All of this is being built. And it is not just the United States that is planning. China is planning too. Russia is planning. India is planning. Japan is planning. Europe is planning. The moon is becoming a destination for nations, a destination for industry, a destination for science. And the implications are profound. Let us start with the practical. A permanent lunar base requires infrastructure, lots of infrastructure, habitats for living, laboratories for research, greenhouses for growing food, power plants for energy, water extraction systems for drinking, breathing, and fuel, communication systems for staying in touch with Earth, transportation systems for moving people and equipment across the surface. All of this must be built. All of this must be maintained. All of this must be paid for. The cost is staggering. The Artemis program is estimated to cost tens of billions of dollars. The ILRS will cost billions more. Private companies are investing billions in lunar landers, rovers, and habitats. But the potential return is even greater. Because the moon is not just a destination. It is a resource that could transform the global economy. Water ice is the most valuable commodity on the moon. Not just for drinking, but for fuel. Split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and you have rocket propellant. The most expensive part of any space mission is launching fuel from Earth. But if that fuel can be produced on the moon, the cost of space exploration drops dramatically. The moon becomes a gas station, a depot, a launching point for missions to Mars and beyond. But water is not the only resource. The moon also contains rare Earth elements, helium-3, and other minerals that are valuable on Earth. Helium-3, in particular, is a potential fuel for nuclear fusion, a clean energy source that could power the planet for centuries. The moon is a treasure chest, and the nations that learn to unlock it will reap the rewards. This is why the competition is so intense. This is why the timelines are so tight. This is why every launch, every test, every milestone is so closely watched. Because the moon is not just a symbol. It is an opportunity to shape the future of humanity. But there is another dimension to this, one that is often overlooked in the discussions of resources and economics. It is about the human experience. Imagine living on the moon. Imagine waking up in a habitat buried beneath the surface, protected from the harsh radiation and extreme temperatures. Imagine looking out a window and seeing Earth hanging in the blackness of space. A blue and white marble, fragile, alone, alive. Imagine stepping out onto the surface, wearing a spacesuit that is both a shield and a lifeline. Imagine the silence, the stillness, the sense of being on a world that has remained unchanged for billions of years. Imagine looking up at the stars and seeing them as they were meant to be seen, unobscured by atmosphere, unfiltered by light pollution. A universe laid out before you in all its glory. This is what the moon offers, not just resources, not just science, but perspective. The Apollo astronauts spoke of the overview effect, a profound shift in consciousness that comes from seeing Earth from space. A realization that we are all on the same planet, all sharing the same fate, all interconnected in ways we never fully understood. A permanent lunar presence will offer that perspective to more people. Not just astronauts, but scientists, engineers, and eventually ordinary citizens. This is the promise of the new moon race. Not just flags and footprints, but a new way of seeing ourselves. A new way of understanding our place in the cosmos. And this brings us to the question of governance. Who will set the rules on the moon? Who will decide who gets to mine the water ice? Who will determine where bases can be built? Who will resolve disputes? The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 provides a framework, but it is vague. It states that the moon is the province of all humankind, that no nation can claim sovereignty over lunar territory, that space exploration should be conducted for the benefit of all countries. But the treaty was written in a different era, a time before the prospect of lunar resource extraction became a reality, a time before nations began planning permanent bases, a time before the moon became a contested frontier. The treaty does not address the questions that are now urgent. Can a nation claim exclusive rights to a specific crater? Can a company mine water ice and sell it? Can a base be built in a location that another nation considers valuable? These are not hypothetical questions. They will be answered in the coming years, and the answers will shape the future of lunar exploration. The Artemis Accords attempt to provide a framework. They emphasize transparency and cooperation. They require signatories to share scientific data. They protect historic sites. They establish safety zones to prevent interference. But the accords are not a treaty. They are not binding. They represent a vision, not a law. And without China's participation, they are incomplete. This is the challenge of the new moon race. Two superpowers, two competing visions, two sets of alliances, and no established framework for resolving disputes. The potential for conflict is real. Misunderstandings could escalate. Resources could be contested. Bases could be built in the same locations. This is not a trivial concern. It is a practical one, and it requires careful diplomacy. But there is another possibility, one that is more hopeful. The moon could become a place of cooperation, a place where nations work together, despite their differences, to achieve something greater than any one of them could achieve alone. The International Space Station is proof that this is possible. A collaboration between the United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, and Canada. A symbol of what humanity can achieve when we work together. A lunar base could be the same. A place where nations pool their resources, share their expertise, and build something together. But that requires trust. It requires compromise. It requires a willingness to put aside national ambitions in favor of a shared vision. And that is the challenge. Because the moon is not just a destination, it is a symbol of power, of prestige, of national greatness. And nations are reluctant to share symbols. But perhaps there is a middle ground. Perhaps the moon can be both, a place of competition and cooperation. A place where nations race to achieve great things, but also work together to build a better future. This is the hope of the new moon race. That competition can inspire innovation. That cooperation can build lasting institutions. That the moon can bring us together, even as it pushes us apart. And that brings us to the question of time. How long will it take to build a permanent lunar presence? How long before the moon becomes a home for humanity? The timeline is uncertain. The Artemis program aims to establish a base by the late 2030s. The ILRS aims for completion in 2036. India hopes to land astronauts on the moon in the 2040s. Japan is planning a lunar base in partnership with the United States. These timelines are ambitious, but they are achievable. The technology exists. The resources exist. The will exists. The question is whether the funding will continue, whether the political support will endure, whether the world will remain focused on the moon, even as challenges arise on Earth. Because the moon is not the only problem we face. Climate change, resource scarcity, political instability. These are urgent challenges that demand attention. But the moon is also part of the solution. It can provide resources. It can provide energy. It can provide perspective. It can remind us that we are all on the same planet, all sharing the same fate, all interconnected in ways we never fully understood. This is the bigger picture, the one that calm cosmic drift is about, the one that reminds us that our problems are small compared to the vastness of the cosmos, that our divisions are trivial compared to the unity of the universe. And that brings us to the final question. Why are we doing this? Why are we returning to the moon? Why are we building bases? Why are we spending billions of dollars and countless hours of effort? The answer is simple. Because we can. Because we are human. Because we explore. Because we push boundaries. Because we refuse to stay in one place. Because the moon is calling us back, and we are finally ready to answer. The new moon race is not just about competition. It is about aspiration. It is about hope. It is about the belief that the future is not fixed, that we can shape it, that we can build something better than what we have. The moon is not the destination. It is the beginning of a new chapter in human history, a chapter that will take us to Mars, to the asteroid belt, to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, to the stars beyond. But it starts with the moon. It starts with a small step, a footprint in the dust, a base on the surface, a permanent presence on a world that has remained untouched for billions of years. And it starts with a question. Are we ready? So here we are, at the edge of something new, something unprecedented, something that will reshape not just our presence in space, but our understanding of what it means to be human. We have traced the arc of this story from the graveyard of dead worlds to the renewed competition between superpowers. We have explored the resources that make the moon valuable, the psychology that drives us to return, and the geopolitical forces that are shaping the future of lunar exploration. But now, we need to step back, because the moon is not the destination. It never was. It is the beginning. Think about what a permanent lunar base represents. Not just a scientific outpost, not just a symbol of national pride, but a stepping stone, a launching pad, a gateway to the rest of the solar system. And there is a simple reason for this. The moon is easier to leave than Earth. It sounds counterintuitive, but it is true. Earth's gravity is fierce. To escape our planet's pull, a rocket must reach a speed of more than 11 kilometers per second. It requires massive amounts of fuel, enormous rockets, and extraordinary engineering. The moon, by comparison, has only 1/6 of Earth's gravity. Escaping its surface requires far less energy, far less fuel, far less cost. This is the key insight, the one that changes everything. If we can establish a base on the moon, if we can learn to extract water ice and turn it into fuel, then the moon becomes a gas station for the solar system. A depot where spacecraft can refuel before pushing deeper into space. Missions to Mars, to the asteroid belt, to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn become not just possible, but practical, affordable, sustainable. The moon is not the destination. It is the launching point for everything that follows. And that is why the new moon race matters so much. Not because of flags and footprints, not because of national pride, but because whoever masters the moon will master the future of space exploration. But there is something else. Something that is often overlooked in the discussions of technology and resources and geopolitics. It is about the people. The first people who live on the moon will face challenges that no human has ever faced before. Extreme temperatures, radiation, isolation, the psychological weight of being so far from home. They will live in habitats buried beneath the surface, protected from the harsh environment. They will breathe recycled air. They will drink water extracted from ice. They will grow food in greenhouses. They will work, live, and sleep in an environment that is utterly alien to everything they have ever known. And they will be pioneers, not just of a place, but of a way of life. The lessons they learn will be invaluable, not just for lunar exploration, but for the next great leap. Because Mars is waiting. Mars is farther. Mars is harder. Mars is a world that will test everything we have learned. A journey to Mars takes months, not days. The isolation is more profound. The environment is more hostile. The margin for error is smaller. The first people who go to Mars will face challenges that make the moon look easy. They will be farther from home than any human in history. They will have no hope of rescue. They will have to survive on their own with limited resources in a world that does not want them. The people who live on the moon will teach us how to do that. They will test the technologies. They will develop the protocols. They will learn the lessons that will keep the first Martian explorers alive. This is the deeper meaning of the new moon race. It is not just about the moon. It is about preparing for everything that comes after. And that includes the unknown. Because we do not know what we will find on Mars. We do not know if life once existed there. We do not know if it exists still. We do not know what secrets the red planet holds. But we know that we will find out. One day. Because that is what we do. That is who we are. We are explorers. We are pioneers. We are the species that looks up at the night sky and wonders. The moon is the first step, not the final destination. Just the beginning of a journey that will take us further than we have ever imagined. And that is worth remembering. As we watch the new moon race unfold, as we see nations compete and cooperate, as we witness the first footprints of a new generation, it is worth pausing to consider the bigger picture. We are building something larger than any one nation, something larger than any one generation, something that will outlast us all, a presence beyond Earth, a future beyond our planet, a civilization that reaches for the stars. This is what the moon represents, not a destination, a beginning, and we are privileged to witness it, to be part of it, to live in a time when humanity is taking its first steps toward a multi-world future. If this journey has stirred something in you, if it has sparked a question or a curiosity, we would love to hear from you. What do you think about the new moon race? Are you excited about the future of lunar exploration? Or do you have concerns about the competition between nations? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your perspective matters to us. And if you want to continue drifting through the cosmos with us, exploring the wonders of the universe, the mysteries of science, and the biggest questions of our time, consider subscribing to Calm Cosmic Drift. New journeys arrive every week. Quiet, thoughtful explorations of the extraordinary reality we inhabit. It would be an honor to have you along for the ride. Until then, keep looking up, keep wondering, and remember that the universe is vast, beautiful, and full of surprises. We will see you in the next drift.